Shalom. Hope everyone is doing well. One of the most commonly asked questions about the mitzvah of maror is how is it conceivably possible to fulfill our obligation through the use of romaine lettuce? After all, if the mitzvah of maror is meant to conjure up vayamaru es chayehem b'avodah kasha, that the Egyptians made the lives of our ancestors very, very bitter, seemingly we should have to use a vegetable that is bitter. And yet, the Mishnah tells us in Maseches Psachim and Daf Lamed Tes that while there are 5 potential vegetables that could serve to fulfill the obligation of maror, number 1 on that list is chazeres, or what the Gemara calls chasa, lettuce. And many poskim assume that lettuce is actually the most ideal form of maror for the halacha. Right, growing up, I always thought that the real maror was the horseradish. And for those of us who couldn't handle the intensity of the horseradish, okay, we let you get away with the soft lettuce. But the reality is, according to most poskim, no, that it actually would be preferable to use romaine lettuce over horseradish. Which begs the question, why should that be? The truth is, this is not a new question. The Gemara and the Bavli and the Yerushalmi deals with this issue. And the Yerushalmi in the second parak of Maseches Psachim Halacha Hey offers a fascinating suggestion. The Yerushalmi says that just as lettuce is tchilasa masok v'sofa mar, just as lettuce begins sweet but ends bitter, so too our ancestors stay in Egypt. At the beginning was very sweet. The Egyptians welcomed them in and gave them the best of the land. But v'sofa mar, over time, the situation devolved from being so sweet to very subtly but surely becoming bitter slaves. The Gemara says in Maseches Sota that the Jews didn't even realize what was happening, how the Egyptians tricked them ever so subtly to become slaves that couldn't get out. And therefore, the chazeres, the lettuce, is actually the ideal symbol of that. What exactly does this mean? So the way most poskim seem to understand it is that lettuce, although at the beginning it tastes sweet, if you keep chewing on it and you pay attention, you'll notice a subtle aftertaste of bitterness. It's not overtly obvious, but at the end there is a faint bitterness that you can detect if you chew on it mindfully, paying attention. I think that there is a lot of symbolism. There's a profound idea behind this. The maror is tchilasa masok v'sofa mar, begins as sweet and ends as bitter. You see, as we've discussed in the past, on Seder night, of course, we're celebrating the historical exodus from Egypt. And one should never lose sight of that. That is clearly the focus of the night. But there also is another exodus beneath the surface that we're celebrating as well. And this, as many Mefarshim point out, the Maharal, Rabbi Yosef Engel, the Sfas Emes, and others, that we're also celebrating the exodus from the inner paro, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the ego, the part that imprisons and enslaves the soul, the godly aspect of a person, the godly essence of a person that only wants to do right, that only wants to be kind, that only wants to fulfill the will of God, gets imprisoned and convinced that it has to do otherwise. The Yetzer Hara guides it from its natural course into doing things that it doesn't really want to be doing. And this is a true slavery. As Rabbi Yosef Engel writes, this is oftentimes a much deeper form of slavery than a physical external taskmaster could be. And this is not just a cute idea. This is really at the heart, the mystical underpinning of the entire Seder, thanking Hashem for saving us both from the external paro, as well as bechol dor vador, every single generation, a person has to see him or herself as having left Egypt, because you are leaving Egypt, that inner Egypt, that part that wants to enslave you. You're also thanking Hashem for liberating you so kindly from that as well. That's Pashtus, what we say at the end of the Magid, when we make the bracha Vasher Ge'alanu V'Go'alas Avoseinu, And right before the end of that bracha, we say, V'node lecha shir chadash, we will thank you with a new song, Hashem, al ge'ulasenu v'al pedus nafshenu. We will thank you for our redemption and for the redemption of our souls. Right? Our soul is also being redeemed. The neshama, the nefesh, from the Yetzer Hara. And if this is the case, if the Yetzer Hara is also the paro of the Seder that we're celebrating liberation from, well, that is a very apropos metaphor for the Yetzer Hara that begins Tchilaso Masok V'sofa Mar. Right? How does the Yetzer Hara work? Kachom Naso Shel Yetzer Hara. The way the Yetzer Hara works is by luring in a person with a very sweet appeal. The Gemara says in Baba Basra and Dafayin Ches that the Yetzer Hara always has Sicha Noeh, right? A beautiful, alluring temptation, calling out to a person to give in. But then, once a person gives in, the end is so bitter, as a person realizes that he or she has betrayed their real self. And oftentimes, they can't get out. That's what the Gemara says in Sukkah and Daf Nun Beis, that the Yetzer Hara batchila dome l'chut shel buchya, that at the beginning the Yetzer Hara is like the threads of a spider web, very easy to cut through. But ulabasof, if you let it hang around long enough, if you get too used to it, dome la vosos ha'agala, it's similar to the cords, the cables of a wagon that are impossible to cut through. It traps you in. This idea of the entrapment of the Yetzer Hara, of the slavery of Egypt, is very reminiscent of the concept of addiction in general. Right? There may be no more powerful example of the way that the Yetzer Hara works than in the world of addiction. Of course, addiction is a complicated phenomenon, and there are many factors, biological, psychological, social, but there clearly does seem to be an aspect of a spiritual component, at least in most cases of addiction as well. Right? And at the beginning, any form of addiction can feel so sweet. It's the solution to all of one's problems. They feel so great. But before a person realizes, Rahman al-Itzlan, he or she can't get out. And then as much as you may think that Paro's finally let you out, just like after many of the Makos, Paro said, all right, you can go, I'm letting you. Then he changed his mind. He said, you're not going anywhere. You're staying here as my slaves. Same thing in addiction. A person can think that he or she is broken free, and tragically they realize that now the addiction has changed his mind. The Yetzer Hara is pulling them right back, not letting them go anywhere, completely stuck, like the Jewish people were, the Zohar says, on the 49th level of impurity in the land of Egypt. And so, every year along comes the Seder. And the Seder is that beacon of light each year that reminds us of something that now the medical community also has come to recognize, though the Torah has been preaching it for thousands of years. And that is that as long as you remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as long as you remember that it's not my strength that's going to free me from this slavery, but that I need to submit to a higher power, that I need ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ribono Shel Olam, the master of the world, to help bring me out from this master, I'm never an actual slave. That's what the Gemara says in Sukkah and Daf Nun Beis, that Ilmale HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'ozer lo, eno yachal lo. That as much as the Yetzer Hara tries to destroy a person in every way that it can, the Gemara says, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps us, we can overcome it. Right? And by the way, this is central to the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We don't have time to get into it now. But do you think that it's coincidence that the very first sign that God gives to Moshe when he says, you're going to go to Paro and you're going to free the Jews from this enslavement, is what does he tell Moshe to do? Turn your staff into a nachash and show dominance over the nachash by grabbing it from the most dangerous part, the tail, and pick it up and show that you're the master. What's a nachash? Right, the very same word, right? It's from the Garden of Eden, from Gan Eden. The nachash is the symbol of the Yetzer Hara, the original tempter that convinces us, that tries to enslave us to do what it wants. And the whole message of the entire story of the Exodus is overcoming the nachash, is showing that you are the master of the nachash, not the nachash the master of you. As long as you remember what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, Ki ehyeh imach, I will be with you. You can always overcome the Nachash. You can always overcome the Yetzer Hara. It may be a battle, right? The Jews didn't get out of Egypt overnight. Some people spend years and years trying to overcome various types of addictions, of connections, of submissions to the Yetzer Hara. But a person should never give up. And that's what the Seder reminds us each and every year. Keep going. Don't give up in the fight. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you. He's going to help you as long as you give him the opportunity to shine through you. And so, when it comes to Seder night, every year we remind ourselves that the Yetzer Hara, the Paro, the Chol Dor Vador, it's always there and it's always trying to enslave us and to entrap us. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu always comes through. As long as we have Torah, as long as we have Emunah, as long as we have Bitachon, we can always trust that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will ultimately help us if we keep trying to get out. And so this year, as we take the maror that begins so sweet but ends so bitter, and we eat it after the matzah, the bread of Emunah, the bread of Bitachon, that always reminds us of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's involvement and his love, we remind ourselves that with Hashem's help, we can overcome any bitterness of the Yetzer Hara, and we should never, ever, ever give up on the fight. And halavai, in doing that, we should experience the taste of true freedom, this and every year, for ourselves and for our loved ones and for all of Klal Yisrael and all of the world. V'nodeh lecha shir chadash al geulaseinu v'al pedus nafshenu. Wishing everyone a chag kasher v'sameach.